Hello, Marie. Welcome
Hey,
back
John.
to the Wax Museum.
How
How
are
are you?
you?
I am good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good. Good to be here.
So you keep changing your name. Currently, it's Love Pirate Kootenaygirl. I
Uh,
actually really like
yep,
this one. I think we talked about the pirate thing in another episode already.
we did.
But it's basically about not being bound to the rules of religion.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And then
yes.
you added love, which I'm like, that's great.
I mean, it's all about love, right?
All
Yeah.
about love. That's right.
A few weeks ago, I was Boudica Kootenai girl.
Boudica?
Boudica, yeah.
What is Boudica?
She was an ancient. Oh, she was a warrior. She was a queen
Uh-huh.
who I think it was. I'm probably wrong now, but maybe it was the Romans or something killed her king, and then she decided to basically pillage and loot and try and destroy them.
Hmm.
So she was a very powerful queen that was very formidable. So I was her for a couple of weeks.
I don't know what it is, but I'm so intrigued by spicy women. So I think
Yeah,
she and I would have been friends.
I think she. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
All right. So today we continue our
Hmm.
series on Jesus and John Wayne by Kristin Kobes Du Mez. There, I
Yeah,
said it. I said it right.
you did it
Um,
right.
I think I did. Um, we covered a bit of the George W. Bush era and Billy Graham era in part one. Bunch of stuff about masculinity. Totally worth listening to. This is part two.
Yep.
We are going to get a bit into the televangelists of the 80s. I was telling someone, I'm like, we're going to talk about the Jimmies.
Oh, that's funny.
So the first Jim Baker,
Yep.
he built this massive Christian empire.
Yep.
I barely remember anything about this guy except for the fall, like the fact that
Mhm.
he fell. It was misappropriation of funds and a sexual scandal. Um,
Mhm.
I've really been following a bit of Jay Baker's work, and I really
Hmm.
appreciate his insight into what he went through as a child with his dad going to prison and the constant media attention. The fact that he has any kind of functional
Yeah,
relationship with his
that
father
must
is
have
amazing to me.
been hard.
Must have been really hard. Yeah. Did you follow any of this like story with Jim Baker as a
Uh
child?
oh.
Like,
My my childhood was so bad,
hmm,
um, and I wasn't raised a Christian,
right.
so that really like I do remember hearing about it in the news and that it was a big deal for the grown-ups and but I actually never really cared much about it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it wasn't like in my scope of life because I wasn't a Christian then. I became a Christian when I was 21, I think. 22 maybe.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, as a child, like even the fact though that you weren't involved in the church and you knew about this, it was a big deal at the time.
Oh, for sure.
Jimmy Swaggart was another one too.
Yep. Yep. I totally remember the names and that
Yeah.
there was huge scandal. Yep.
Did that? So I guess as a child, did you think about religion because of it at all? Like, do you remember like what you thought of religion as a result of those kinds of scandals?
Um I like I honestly like I just didn't put two and two together. Like
Hmm.
I was always afraid of religion because I just
Yeah.
felt broken. I felt so broken that um to get close to anything to do with God, I was afraid,
Hmm.
basically. Yeah.
So the book goes into promise keepers.
Mhm.
Um, So I mean, this I'm actually quite familiar with. I really did enjoy men's events at one point in my life. I haven't been to one in quite a while, but it was sort of a support group for us heads of household, right?
Mm, right.
What was your perception of Promise Keepers?
Well, at that time, we were pretty fundamentalist. Like, so it was
Yeah,
like, yeah, like we we totally loved it. That kind of thing. Like, um, like a man, needs his man space and needs to
yeah,
do the man thing and be masculine and lead the house, and like we were very much like that at that time. Um, we loved people like John Piper and Mark Driscoll.
mm-hmm,
Um, and now looking back, I find it's just so horrifying because we're so different now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think like, see, like to me, it's kind of like it's like there's this template of what a man should be, and that's what a lot of this was. It's the John Wayne template, or she talks a lot about William Wallace, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
is so bizarre, but like it's like all these Americans that are like, I want to be William Wallace, but like, but it's like a template that they expect men to fit. And
Right.
then on the female side, there's a template they want women to fit. It's the woman that these manly men desire. And the other thing that's happening is I just saw a tweet today that talked
Oh.
about how Promise Keepers is trying to reboot. So they want to do a
Oh.
reboot, and
Okay.
they're basically excited that they're gonna have the largest gathering since COVID, and it'll bring a good name for all these godly men that they're doing this big gathering.
Okay.
And but they also
Wow.
said the reason why they need to do this gathering is because we have gendered confused children. We have men that want to play women's basketball and LGBTQ, and it was just all of that. And it's funny, I was just saying today to somebody, I'm like, do you think like maybe toxic masculinity had a role to play in a lot of what's gone on in these people's lives? And you
Yes.
guys are like, you know what this world needs? More toxic masculinity. And it's like,
It
no,
doesn't make it makes no sense.
it's
It
exactly
makes
what
no
the
sense.
world doesn't need. And it's like we've got all these people that are trying to figure out who they are. Now, if we
Mm-hmm.
stop pushing these gender stereotypes on them, I think they can figure out who they are in a much more healthy manner.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Like so there was the one quote that in the book from Wild at Heart
Uh-huh.
where Eldridge says, hold on a sec, I have it in my notes here. I was just listening to it today actually, and it made me like stop in my tracks. And yeah, here it is. So the quote is, God made men dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Women didn't start wars or commit violent crimes, men did. I was like, okay, if that one statement is not the statement that says men should not be leaders, I don't know what is. Hold on. Men start wars, men are the most violent. Well, hello, like.
And he's saying this like it's a good thing. That's so bizarre.
He said it, because then he said,
Yeah.
then he talks about like men want to be like the rescuer and the hero.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I mean, like, how can you not see that what you just said is awful, right?
Men want to be the good guy with guns. I was thinking about that, like the whole like, how do you stop a bad guy with gun, good guy with gun? But I'm like, well, remember when Jesus said no one's really good?
Right.
Oh snap!
Right. Yep. Yep. And
It's
like the power of love is subversive, right? Like, if you have, remember that there was an image, like it was a few years ago. It's like the hippie putting the flower in the end of the gun.
Hmm.
Remember that? Like,
I don't
and
know if I've
that,
seen that, but I could picture it.
okay, well, like it was like maybe Time Magazine, or it was like something.
Oh, okay.
And it's like that's the power of love. Like, you don't, like love is like, its strength lies in its weakness. And so you have, this evangelical Christianity pumping itself up so much and making itself look so like strong and unbeatable and warlike,
Yeah.
when that's not what love is, though. Like,
No.
and you can there's countless examples in the Bible of how Jesus was gentle and how he was kind, and
Yeah.
he himself said, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Did Jesus
Yeah.
even carry a sword? Like,
Yeah.
you know
And I think like it's interesting to me because it's like people are always like, well, love can only do so much. And it's like, yeah, but love defends your children too, you
yep,
know?
for
But
sure,
it's
for
like it's
sure.
love for all people. It doesn't mean that there's no consequences.
Hmm.
When people take advantage of other people, love
Right.
brings consequences to those people that are hurting other people and
Yes.
works to restore them if it's possible.
Yes.
And so it's like there's love is so much more complicated and so much more deep than
Yes.
our human understanding is capable of.
True. True.
And it's
So,
like love is the algorithm, but it's people don't want to admit that that's all it is. But
that's
love is
right.
the algorithm, and
Right.
Jesus said that. He
Yeah.
said, like love God, love your neighbor as yourself. All the
Yeah.
commandments are
Right.
hinged on that. And it's
Yeah.
like, but yet people are scared of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have a philophobia.
A philophobia. I love that word. Yeah. But back to the gender roles, like,
Uh-huh.
you know, um, so the chapter I was listening to today in the book was
Hmm.
talking all about that, and
Yeah.
like the whole argument and complaint from the conservative church is that, like, everybody's so screwed up now. We have to get back to our basic, like, how it was, and I'm thinking, like, okay, how it was actually so traumatic that it's taking generations to work itself through,
Totally.
right? So you're still seeing the effects of toxic masculinity, right? You're still seeing that in the public.
The problem is that within conservatism, they don't know how to separate toxic masculinity from masculinity. And
Right.
so when you attack toxic masculinity, they look at that and say, "Oh, you hate masculinity, you hate men." And it's like, "No."
It's the opposite. It's like you want to say, like, men don't fit into this one narrow way of being a man. There's all kinds of men. Just like women don't fit into this one narrow, like,
Mhm.
just gonna have lots of sex, have babies, be barefoot and pregnant all the time. There's tons of women who don't want kids, who just
Yeah.
want careers. Like,
Mhm.
so you're saying, like, this is the ordained way of being, the God intended,
Yeah.
or the created order. Excuse me. I absolutely loathe that statement. The created order. The created order is like, we came from a garden, so get back to gardening. Stop driving your car. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But
Yeah.
you want to say this is how we should be living in these small gender, like, super narrow ways of being. Well, of course you're gonna have thousands of people reacting, because not everybody fits that.
And I mean, the flip side of that too is that there are women who felt like they have to be career women,
Right.
And it's like, oh shit, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. And it's like, are you kidding me? That's awesome that you're a stay-at-home
Right.
mom.
Like, I chose to be a stay-at-home mom. Like,
Yeah.
that's all I ever wanted to be.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
honestly,
awesome.
that's all I ever wanted to be. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm intimidated by career women. I have very good friends who are career
Hmm.
women and business owners. and it doesn't intimidate me at all. And because people can be free to be who they are, because
Yeah.
right, you know,
It's
and
like, can we stop telling people how to be?
yes, yes.
All right. Phyllis Schlafly? I don't remember how to say that.
I think so. So this actually goes really well into this because ask your question.
Oh, you got the questions in front of you too. That's awesome. She essentially was a civil rights leader against the Equal Rights Amendment. What do you think motivated her to do this?
So just what I was just talking about, like probably deep insecurity. Like this is my guess, is that like to affirm and reaffirm your position, people always seem to, or often, will take a stance against someone else and say, well, no, that's not the right way. Like God doesn't want you to be that way. He wants you to be my way, this way, right? And so she was a very like feminine woman, you know what I mean? And even when reading, well, I listened to the book, but when reading the book, you kind of got the picture that she had like kind of some ego, like, and a lot of sass, let's say, okay, a nice way to put it. And I think that came from a deep insecurity that to reinforce her security within her position, she had to tear down the other side, because that's generally what it is, isn't it? Like when we can't let people be themselves and make their own choices, that comes from deep insecurity.
Totally. Well, so much of this is deep insecurity. And I say this time and time again, like the people that push the hardest for very strict gender roles are so insecure in their own gender. Like it's like, because like the guy that's going to tell guys how to be guys, he's the guy that can't even touch pink. It's like, oh no, there's pink in the room. I got to get away from it. Right.
And
so it's like the people I saw, actually Phil Vischer was posting about how someone was attacking him for his masculinity. And I was saying to him, like, here's the thing. I'm like, I'm not going to read the whole thread where this guy was attacking you. They're always like 12 point things tearing down the person. I'm like, this is dumb. Because, you know, the way I see it, Phil, is like you got like your ukulele and you've got like your kids shows that you do. And I'm like, that is a great masculinity you're rocking. Like, just you. Don't let anybody tell you. And I'm like, that's much more masculinity to me than the guy that's trying to tear him down and trying to make him fit a template. Because it's like, that's control. That's complete insecurity.
Yeah. Like not all guys need to be like weaponized men. They don't all need to be super macho. And I mean, some of my favorite people are guys that are kind and gentle and aren't intimidated by my outgoingness.
Yeah, and I mean, like, some guys legit are that gruff, and that's awesome. You know, you go out and wrestle a bear, cool, dude. That's
totally
really cool.
Awesome.
But like, don't tell me I have to wrestle a bear, because that's dumb.
Exactly.
All right, Bill Gothard. Never heard of him prior to reading this book, but he was heavily involved in Christian education, and he had principles that he used in, or actually I think he still does have principles he uses in seminars called design, authority, responsibility, suffering, ownership, freedom, and success. That's a lot of points. So the design principle is that people should understand the specific purpose for which God created them. And see, that just complicates things. So now I got to go read the Bible and understand why God created every possible thing that I could interact.
Well, yeah, and that just leaves it all to interpretation and who says like their idea is the better idea. Yeah, right? Like, and why are we going to say like a culture 2,000 years ago with all their weird culture things is like the way that God meant it to be?
Yeah, and I mean, people tiptoe around this stuff and kind of explain it. It's like, oh well, given the context, and it's like you can bend it whichever way you want. Authority principle. The authority principle is that inward peace results when people respect and honor authorities that God has put in their lives. That's a dangerous concept.
To respect authority?
It is. Because it's like, well, God put this person in authority, so I got to do what they say.
Yeah.
And it's like,
when you tie God to it, for sure.
And until they tell you to wear a mask. Man, I gotta check my cynicism here. I'm like,
hey, it's true though. Like, obey the authorities until like, oh, what? You have to wear a mask? No, I'm not going to obey that. That's dumb. Like,
yeah, that's counter scriptural. Yeah. It's been amazing. It's been amazing to see how people have like just kind of bent everything. But yeah, the authority principle, as long as they don't violate the laws of God. And I mean, like, I think at some level, it's like I do, like, I'm not exactly a person that bucks authority all the time. You know, it's like, I mean, public health orders, I'm like, okay, well, clearly these guys know things I don't. So I am not going to, you know, find a YouTube video that tells me they're wrong and then decide to go against what they say.
Right.
But I guess, like, here's my observation is I found that there's people who will question authority everywhere except for in the church.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just interesting to me because they're just like, well, no. The way the pastors read in the Bible has to be completely correct.
Right.
But then they'll go outside of that.
Sorry. Sometimes even those people will think that only their interpretation is the correct, and they'll challenge the pastor even.
Yeah, that's true too. So it's like knowing when, I mean, like, clearly this principle that it's like you need to obey the authorities that God put in your life. It's like, well, which authorities did God put in my life? Because, I mean, Joe Biden did steal the election, so God didn't really. I mean, you can have so much fun with this concept, but I mean, the dangerous thing, like when I read that, I was like, well, this is where abuse happens.
100%.
God put
you tie God onto it. Yep.
God put this pastor in charge of me, and now this pastor has asked me to do things that are immoral.
Right. Yep.
And there's been a lot of abuse done that way. So it's
tons.
And I think it's tough because I kind of look at it and I'm like, there are authorities, you know, like I said, the health authorities, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to trust they know what they're doing. I'm going to trust that God put the right people in authority there. As for the church, I'm like, well, sometimes these guys are on and sometimes they're not. Yeah. And I like them when they're on. I mean, this past Sunday, the sermon was dynamite. This pastor said, love yourself. I have never heard a pastor say that in my life. And dude is on. Like, that was amazing, right?
Yeah.
But there's other days where it's not quite on. And it's like, I have the discernment to say, this wasn't for me today.
Right.
So I cannot just mindlessly obey authority.
Right. I mean, the difference in those two examples is, like, one, you have like scientific theory and method backing it up. And the other, it's pretty much just conjecture. I mean, we have theologians. Yeah. We have Bible translators. Like, we have all that. But even within those, there's discrepancies and people who disagree. So
certainly.
So on the one hand, you have science. That's a pretty black and white, like, way of doing life. And on the other, it's very subjective.
But then I look at it and say, well, if love is the algorithm it actually becomes a lot clearer and a lot more simple.
It does. It
And
does.
so if that sermon doesn't align with love being the algorithm, it's like, well, I'm not feeling this.
Yeah. Right.
Responsibility. The responsibility principle is that a clear conscience results when people realize they are responsible to God for every thought, word, action, and motive.
Okay, I just want to go like, whoa.
That's
talk about like just piling shame
yeah.
onto your life. Like
Mm-hmm.
like seriously, like so how about just doing something that doesn't harm somebody else?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Not because like, oh, I'm gonna steal an extra cup of laundry soap from my roommate. Oh, I shouldn't do that because God knows my actions. He knows my thoughts. I've already sinned. I'm screwed. Or that would actually be taken from that person, and that I wouldn't like that. That's harmful. That feels bad. I'm not going to do that. Like there's a huge difference.
And your second example is using love as the algorithm. It's like,
yes.
This would not be loving to my neighbor. And
right.
I think like the piece that still makes what I believe Christianity, in my opinion, is that I'm like, okay, love is the algorithm. And when I fall short of love, I need forgiveness.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do better. And I work at it. Right. And so I think if, responsible to God for every love, word, or sorry, every thought. I've got love on my mind. I'm sorry. I got to stop. Thought, word, action, and motive. But what if it's like, I'm going to pursue love in every thought, word, action, and motive. I just replace God with love, and it works.
And then God is love.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're actually replacing fear with love. Yeah. Is what you're doing. Right?
Love over fear. Have you read Dan White's book?
No.
So basically his argument is that the opposite of fear is love. And talks about our divided society. I haven't read the book in a while. But it's like basically saying that the antidote to all of our polarization is love. Beautiful.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
He's a beautiful human being. I like that guy a lot. Do you follow him on Twitter?
I don't, but I'm going to have to.
Yeah, do it. I'll link him in the show notes.
Sure.
Okay. Suffering principle. Suffering principle, oh, this will be fun, is that people should allow the hurts from offenders to reveal blind spots in their own lives. Genuine joy is the result of fully forgiving offenders.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
That is toxic.
That's awful. That's really awful. Because in a way you're saying, please come hurt me and abuse me.
Yeah.
So I can see my shit.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need someone to come and hurt me to know that I've got broken parts. I already know that.
Well, and I mean, I should not be coming to you and saying, well, Marie, you're hurt, but it's going to help you understand what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's like, how about you're hurt? This sucks. I want to walk with you through this. And I don't know what any of this means. And I don't want a principal to tell me how I'm supposed to deal with you when you're hurt. And I believe like there is genuine joy that results in fully forgiving others.
For sure.
But there's a process.
Yeah.
And I think more than anything right now, I'm learning there's a process to everything. And I have to trust the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
forgiveness, like a good definition of forgiveness is necessary, right? Because forgiveness doesn't mean staying friends with someone or allowing them to have proximity to you in your life still. You know, you can still set up very strong boundaries within forgiveness.
Absolutely.
But for some reason, some people don't think that.
No, and I mean, it's because they don't want worldly wisdom. Like my Bible has all the wisdom in it. And so
Right.
I think that's what the danger is. And I'm like, I
Hmm.
really, I can't remember who said this. It might have been Sky Jitani. I'm a huge fan of Sky Jitani. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I think he said something along the lines of like the Bible is not like just like an instruction manual that we should be opening up, and it's like if it happens outside of the Bible, it doesn't exist. It's like the
Right.
Bible is a lens through which we can see the world. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, if I look at that, like at this book of wisdom, and I use it as a lens to see the world, it's like that's probably a better place to be than to try to
Yeah.
fit my whole world into this book.
Right. But then also within that, then to make sure that you are approaching the Bible through the lens of Jesus,
Yeah,
right? Because that
100%.
makes a big difference.
That's like Bruxy Cavey kind of stuff.
It is. Yeah.
I love Bruxy Cavey.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my friends actually got to talk to Bruxy Cavey on his podcast, so
Oh, cool.
maybe it's possible for me someday.
Ask. Never hurts to ask.
Ask. I'm so bad at asking. Actually, I'm getting better at asking. All right. The ownership principle is that people are stewards, not owners of their possessions. Well, I don't hate that.
Yeah.
I'm
I mean,
okay with that. Like I don't know. See, my thing too is that like I see God very differently than
mm,
Bill Gothard would.
yeah.
I like God's a lot more chill.
Yeah. Yeah. Way more chill.
So he's like, "Hey son, want to take the car for a spin?" I'm like, "Yes, yes, I'm gonna do that."
Yeah.
It comes back with a scratch. He doesn't get mad at me. He's like, "Oh, yeah, that happened."
Yeah. Totally. Like no big deal.
Yeah, it's like he owns the car, but he's pretty chill about it. I mean, like if I
Yeah.
totaled the car, he might give me a word and say like maybe yeah, you need to slow down, son.
Yeah. Like be a little bit more safe. Did you wear your seatbelt?
He's the good father. It's beautiful.
Right. And he might ask if it was fun.
Yeah. Oh, he totally would.
Yeah.
Okay. The freedom. I totally would ask my kid.
I know. I would too.
The freedom principle is enjoying the desire and the power to do what's right.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, what it's like what's right, is
I don't know if I like the phrase "what is right."
and it like yeah, that's very subjective again, like
Yeah.
a lot of the way evangelicals think of what is right, I would not be like that's not right,
What if the
right?
freedom principle is enjoying the desire and power to do what is love?
Very good.
I like that.
Very good.
I should make amendments to all of these with my new cult that I'm starting. No.
Yeah, yeah, perfect.
The success principle is that when people learn to think God's thought by meditating and memorizing scripture, they make wise decisions and fulfill their life purpose.
I don't know. I mean, when I was doing that, I just like pretty much stomped all over myself all the time and expended myself beyond measure.
Well, you're
And
stressing yourself out. I think we
yeah,
make I think religion makes things far too complicated.
way too
Like
complicated.
if the algorithm is love, I can remember that. That's something
Right,
I can remember. My
right.
little brain can handle that. And so like I yeah,
Like,
I think there's bits of scripture that I think are so awesome and so
yeah,
helpful.
for sure.
It's like there's like a scripture that's like be quick to listen and slow to speak. I'm like, oh
Yep,
yeah, I'm
that's a
posting
good one.
that. That's good stuff. I didn't even reference it. I've been
Yep.
posting scripture and not referencing it of late. I'm like, no one's gonna say I'm plagiarizing it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't know. It's just weird to me that it's like, nope, you got to put the verse and the reference so people know that what you said is actually true. I'm like, it's a principle. It's a universal principle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, sure, God said it. Like, but everybody, like, who cares? Like,
Yeah. You know, like my life motto that I always told my kids, and I think I said this in the other podcast, like I really did tell my kids this all the time. I
Hmm.
said, like, not like, you know, heavy duty Bible, not like nothing like that. I said, guys, whatever you do, just don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
I think that sums everything up.
Yeah, mine is be not shitty one to another.
That'd be a good tattoo.
It's in the Bridge Levoit version of the Bible somewhere.
Correct.
All right. So interestingly, actually, sadly, tragically, this guy has as many as 34 sexual harassment allegations against him.
Wow.
Crazy how this whole patriarchal structure tends to lead to a whole lot of this.
Yeah.
Were you surprised by that when you heard it?
Not really. I mean, the toxic masculinity has a sense of entitlement in it, right? That
Yeah.
they're entitled to basically whatever they want. They're the leaders. They're the big guys. So it totally makes sense that would happen. Like, what else is gonna happen?
And that's what terrifies me about this whole authorities that God placed over you.
Right.
It's like, because I know stories, I've heard numerous stories of women who have been put in that position where it's like, well, the
Yeah.
pastor's asking me to do this sexual favor and
Right.
I don't know what to do because that's the guy that's in authority.
Right.
And it's like, that's
Yeah.
spiritual abuse. It's evil. It's
Huge. Oh, it's gross. Yeah.
And it's like, we should just not give people that kind of authority. Like, it's
Yeah.
awful. And to tell people they're lesser because of their gender is just so toxic and
It's
evil.
gross. Yeah. It's like, oh, like equal but different. Like, no, no, that doesn't work.
And I mean, like, and I'm like, I'm not one of those people that's gonna say men and women are exactly the same.
Of course not.
But I don't think stereotyping the genders does us
Yeah.
any favors.
Right.
And so I'm kind of somewhere in between because I'm like, well, people are like, women could do anything a man can do. And I'm like, yeah, I think a lot of things, but I think there's some things that like women do better on average. And there's some things guys do better on average.
Mhm.
I don't
Like, if
know.
you think of,
I can't think of
if you think,
something that I do better than a woman.
well, I just think of it in terms of like energy, like masculine energy, feminine energy. It's not tied to whether you have boobs or a penis.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they're just two different kinds of energy
Yeah.
that manifest themselves. And
Yeah.
both genders can have both of those kinds of energy.
Yeah.
Right?
I like
some
that.
men
It
are
sounds
great
very
healers.
new agey and it's gonna creep some
Well,
people out. And I'm okay with that. You're from BC. That's normal speak.
Hey, I'm from the Kootenays. That's what we do here.
All right. James Dobson. I actually, on my new album I'm working on, it's called Medicine for the Dead. I love
that.
I've requested that Zandy make a track that I'm calling Jimmy D. We'll see if that one gets made. I'm not even sure what I'm gonna say, but I think it'd be a lot of fun to do a song about Jimmy D. Jimmy D.
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, James Dobson is a name I'm very familiar with. My parents were huge on this guy. He was a Christian psychologist with a whole lot of advice on parenting. I still have some books I purchased when my kids were little, Bringing Up Boys and Bringing Up Girls. I never finished reading them. And I'm okay with that.
We had Bringing Up Boys. Yep.
You did? Oh, and you didn't have girls, so you didn't have to read the other one.
No.
I do remember there was like something about like lighting like raw sewage on fire or something.
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Like it was like boys playing around and they were playing near the manhole trying to light it up or something. Oh, boys do that. Anyways. So did that influence the way you brought up your boys then, you think?
Yeah, for sure. It totally did. Like when my kids were little, we were super evangelical, fundamentalists. Like,
Yeah.
you know, our firstborn, he was very, well, very obedient. I mean, we did the whole like baby wise and raising kids God's way, and the James Dobson stuff. And my secondborn was far more emotional than my firstborn, and often it was super hard to parent him because the tools that we took from these evangelical teachers worked for our first, worked really well, and did not work for our second.
Huh.
And we really tried to make them work for our second.
Yeah.
And you know, by the time he was like, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, I was just like, screw it. This like, I'm going to use my own wisdom.
Yeah.
Because this is hurting my kid actually. And that's when I stopped looking everywhere else for parenting advice and just started to use my own intuition. And I'm so glad that I did, because if we kept going down that road, it would have been like so damaging to him.
Intuition is a huge thing. I think a lot about like the elephant and rider analogy. Like this idea that our intuition is an elephant and our intellect is the rider on the elephant. I've probably said this so many times on the podcast, but it's like, it's just fascinates me because it's like you decide, you're like, it's like, hey mom, can I take the car? And your first inclination is like, no, you can't take the car. And then you stop and you think, wait, why don't I want him to take the car?
Right.
And then your brain kind of quickly like, oh, it's because this. And then it's like, no, my brain is screwing with me. I just felt like I don't want to take the car. Why is that?
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, like and I mean, intuition can be a very positive thing because you're like, well, I don't feel right about this. Why don't I feel right about this? And I think it's like kind of being, I guess that having a good connection with your body, I think is how you develop a good intuition. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think so. But part of it is like when I started to like learn who my kid was and started to try and understand his perception, but also to understand like as a kid, I didn't have, like, I always say I was raised by wolves. Like I had nobody. I was like huge abandonment issues. Like, I mean, I'm amazed I'm actually alive. Like I'm not even kidding. It was that hard.
And a person with love and compassion.
Well, yeah.
Something went very well. Magic.
Well, something happened, yes. Yeah. But so when I'm parenting my kid, I began to look at the deep well within that was empty, like very empty. Yeah. And I would look inside and say, what did I need? What did I need? Yeah. And that's where I parented from, was that I needed that. So I obviously, like, a kid needs that from their parents. So
that's
we stopped.
Crazy, because like that's like a therapeutic technique. Parenting, I don't know if the right term is the inner child, but it's like you self-parent yourself. But in doing so, you were able to parent your child because you were able to give them what that child inside of you needed. Yeah. Like, and so that required having to look and recognize just how empty that big black well was within me. Wow. And it's still empty in many ways. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I have so much shit to work through. Yeah. But that was what I did when I stopped listening to evangelical voices, and because it didn't feel right for my second born, Yeah.
And I just started to say like what does a kid need? They don't need to be made and formed into this mold. They can be who they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of parents are scared to do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are just so many possibilities. But it's like,
Oh
I
yeah.
think the deal breaker is making sure that they're moving toward love.
100%. 100%. And that was around the time, like I think maybe when he was, yeah, like maybe when he was around 9, my other one was around 11. That's when I would start to tell them, look, guys, just whatever you do, don't be an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like just don't do that. That
Yeah.
hurts. It hurts
Yeah.
people. You know, like,
Yeah.
and that just became our motto. Like,
Yeah, I like it.
yeah. So
Uh,
that's not based on any gender norm, any gender like it's just real simple. Like, love people, love
yeah.
yourself, love people,
Yeah.
and in that exchange, you will love God.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. All right. Left Behind. Did you ever get into that?
Oh my god. Okay. So I think the first 4 books were written before I discovered them.
Uh-huh.
And I read the first 4 books in 3 days.
Whoa.
I was just like, yeah.
I'd say doctors
like,
don't recommend that.
oh, I couldn't put them down. Like, I really, because that was back in our like real fundamentalist days.
Yeah.
And it felt like this is what's gonna happen, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was a lunatic, I think, back then.
I'm a recovering lunatic.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
So did that affect you? Like, how did that affect you?
Well, it just like heightens the paranoia of like the new world order and you know, the mark of the beast and like all those things in Revelation that people interpret literally. And yeah, it just heightened that for me, and it built in a more of a distrust for the world around me.
And that's a big thing, is distrust of the world around me, because I mean that's where QAnon comes from, and a lot of this like kind of COVID behavior that we're seeing. It's like, well, they won't let
100%.
they won't let the churches meet, and it's like, well, yeah, it's aerosol spreading. When you open your mouth, aerosol spread, which is
it's a pandemic.
Walmart, unless we all sing in Walmart. Are we all gonna sing it? Anyways.
Right.
I try not to get into this because like I know that like people that are fiercely like anti-restrictions, it won't change their minds.
No.
So I'm like, okay, you know what? Love is the algorithm. So
yeah.
I'm just gonna let you do you.
Yeah.
All right. It was funny. I was using the term reconstruction for rebuilding my faith after deconstruction. I might need to use a different word after this book, because it's like reconstructivism, as described in the book, is a belief that society should be ruled by divine law.
Right. Well, I have a good word for you, because this is the word that I use.
Okay.
Because, I mean, my deconstruction, I think, like, although it started really slowly, in 2019 and 2020, it just like took off. Like it was just intense. And through that, I discovered and realized how scattered as a person I was. How through my entire church life, piece by piece of me was taken away and just scattered. And so as I'm starting to rebuild myself, I like to use the word reintegration. Because I'm pulling back these parts of me that were stuffed away, that were told that were shameful, that were sometimes, you know, that just disappeared altogether. And I'm discovering these new parts of myself. So I'm bringing them back into like my core self, my who I am. I'm reintegrating those parts that the church stole. And I say that like intentionally, that the religion of Christianity in the church stole parts of myself.
It's not supposed to do that, is it?
No, it shouldn't.
Reintegration. Yeah, that may be a better word. I mean, it's definitely a better word, but I'll have to think about that. So anyways, I guess really it was like this idea of trying to shift society so that it's following divine law. That's what Christians are trying to advocate for, on the extreme end anyways, of the hyper political. What do you think Christians should actually be advocating for?
Well, love and ethics. And so like for me, the two biggest things that matter, three biggest things, love, obviously, that's just always a given. And like consent and ethics.
Yes.
Right? So like your autonomy, who you are as a human, that matters. Your personal consent matters. And so those are things that the church should 100% care the most about.
I love your bender on consent. And I think when we did that episode on cuties, that was kind of my take home thing. And it's kind of been integrated into my belief system, is like this idea of consent, because it's like God is about consent.
Yeah.
And it's like the Holy Spirit is a gentleman. How many times have I heard that in like in charismatic circles? But it's true. It's like, because like even, in my own kind of like, well, God, I'm done with you. And he's just like, okay. And I'm like, really? Really? You're just going to let me go that easy? He's like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'll be here when you come back. But like, yeah, you go ahead. You do your thing, prodigal, like whatever. Right.
Yep.
And so I come back to him in a different way. And it's a consensual relationship. God and I have a consensual relationship. And and so, I think you're bang on with that. And that is something that is so missing from the Christian ethic. When I saw John Piper stumbling over his words, trying to tell everybody that covenant is everything, I'm like, ooh, no, it's not. You're missing consent, dude. I mean, covenant is great. I recommend covenant. I think covenant is great. But if it's not consensual, that is abuse. It's slavery.
Yeah. Totally.
All right. Jerry Falwell, co-founder of Liberty University, was quite instrumental in forming the Christian right. They wanted segregated schools, and the government was moving toward integrated schools. They made a big deal about the government attacking Christian education. It's really sad that racism was part of the early stages of this formation. My understanding is that it required that they bring abortion into the conversation to expand the moral majority beyond the South, because in the South it was racially motivated. And so they looked at the Catholics and they're just basically like, hey, the Catholics are really against this abortion thing. Do you think we could get more power this way? And so they did it. So it's really hard not to allow this to delegitimize the movement as a whole. I guess a good question would be like, I'm sure there was a point where you were fiercely pro-life. Or was there?
Like, okay, that's a hard question, because I mean,
this is a question I never ask on my podcast, so maybe we shouldn't go there.
No, it's fine to go there. Like,
yeah.
I'm totally pro-life.
Mm.
like 100%.
Mm.
But I'm equally pro-choice,
Mm.
100%. You can be both. And I think that the system and the focus that the church has chosen to take on that, they're just coming at it from the wrong perspective.
I agree. I agree.
So all it's done is divided people, and there hasn't actually been, good conversation about the issue.
Well, and I think if we back up to like our consent argument again, I think if we aren't violating consent, I think we have
Yep.
less unwanted pregnancies to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I in a lot of ways, with a lot of this craziness, I just want to back up and figure like, how do we stop people from violating consent? Well, I think we need less toxic masculinity, because I think
100%.
so many of these guys are
Yep.
not well adjusted and they don't know who they
Exactly.
are. And the only thing they know how to do is chase girls.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, and that's where their self-esteem is coming from. And it's like so screwy. And it's like, I think we need a healthier definition of gender. And I think that healthy definition of gender is letting people figure it out instead of trying to stereotype them, because there's so much pressure that we're putting on people to be a certain way.
Right.
It's something that was so shocking to me is like a friend of mine was telling me about like this award ceremony that he was at, and one of his coworkers won an award, and the guy that gave her an award went towards her for a hug, and he could see how uncomfortable she was with that.
Wow.
And he said to me, you don't realize this, but for a woman, when she's in that position, she knows that if she refuses the hug, that'll reflect poorly on her.
On her, that's right.
And I was like, really? I didn't know that. Like, as a guy, if someone came toward me and wanted to hug me, I can say no if I want to. It's no biggie. Like, it's like, oh, okay, no, I'm not a hugger, and it would be fine.
Yeah.
But there's a stigma that's attached to that. And I'm like, really? So like the next day I go to work, and one of the strongest women I know, and I said to her, hey, question for you. If you were in this situation and there was a guy and he's Mr. Handsy, and you know that he's the guy that always hugs women, would you feel like you have to give him a hug? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, I did not know that, like, at all.
I have the perfect example too. Like, I've experienced that. So just one time in church, this was about 2 years ago. I'm a huggy person. Like, I do like giving hugs, but I don't like hugging everybody.
Yeah.
And I had given my girlfriend a hug.
Yeah.
And this one guy who was standing like not far away, and like, he's not a bad guy, but it's just not someone I would want.
Yeah.
To, Yeah. And I started walking past him, and he goes, "What, Marie? No hugs?" And he wanted a hug, and I just like, it caught me so off guard that I was like, "Oh, sure!" Like, I totally gave him a hug, but while I was doing it, I was so furious.
Wow.
So furious that for one, that I felt like I couldn't say no. I should have said no. For two, being the pastor's wife saying no after I just gave someone a hug. Yeah. Like, what's that gonna do? I could keep listing things.
So and I was complicated.
So angry, and I avoided him ever since. Like, wow. I mean, I haven't been in church now for a while, but I just avoided him. But that's the common experience for women.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I just think that this is where, like, I'm like, gender roles is stupid. Like, that's the expectation. It's silly. And because it plays into that narrative again, that he's a guy, he asks for it, he gets it. Right. And it's like, why does it gotta be that way? Like, with everything.
Right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not helpful. Like
Yeah.
I want us, like I desperately just want us to be able to see people as people and let them be whoever
Yeah.
they believe they are. I don't need
Yeah.
to tell someone who I think they are. I want
Right.
them to just be who they believe they are. And I mean,
Yeah.
like, if somehow I can help someone discover who they are, awesome. But I don't want to thrust, like,
Yeah.
force my idea of who I think they should be on them.
Right. Yeah.
All right, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is interesting how this kind of comes into this topic.
Yeah.
He was sort of an enemy of the evangelical right. They really pushed this idea that character matters with him because of the affair.
Right.
The funny thing is I no longer see that as an affair. I see that as rape because of his
Yep.
position of power. He had
Right.
authority over the intern, so the relationship was not actually consensual. Um,
Right.
did your
Yep.
view of Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton change over time?
I kind of thought that right from the beginning, like
Hmm.
from hearing about it, like there's a power dynamic going on, so that doesn't seem good.
I
But
feel like
but
that was missed from the conversation for a lot of people, and I was a
oh,
teen.
I'm sure it was.
I was
Yeah.
a teen
Oh,
at the
for sure.
time, but it's
Yeah.
like I feel like, yeah, I really feel like she got a bad rap on that. Like,
Huge. Huge.
I mean, it's same
Yeah.
thing with David and Bathsheba, right? It's like, well, why was she bathing out on the roof to begin with, right? And it's like, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no. The king summoned her. Like, how would she say
Yeah.
no to that? I mean,
Right.
that's like
Right. Yeah.
crazy. All right, what about Limbaugh and O'Reilly? I never really got into those guys.
Me neither. I
Do
don't
you
know. It
know
just seemed like
people
loudmouth.
though? Like, do you think there's people you know that are heavily influenced by them?
Um, Now I'm not sure, but like years ago, probably. Yeah.
And then it's crazy because like in Canada, it's like how are we influenced by these people?
Right.
I think now it's more like Ben Shapiro,
Uh.
Tucker Carlson. Tucker
Oh
Carlson
gosh.
basically said that like if your kid's outdoors with a mask, that's child abuse. It's like
I
okay.
can't stand that man.
I'm assuming like your group of friends know a lot about child abuse. Like to Tucker
No.
Carlson, not you, not
Yes. Yes. Yes.
you. Okay. Anyways, okay. Josh Harris, like that was
Uh
a big
huh.
influence on purity culture.
Yep.
I do remember his book being part of the curriculum of a youth group I was a youth leader for.
Yep.
The emphasis of purity seemed to put a lot of pressure on the girl in the relationship. Um,
Yep.
I guess you like did that purity teaching affect you personally?
Oh, for 100%. Like, um, so I was in in the early parts of my faith. I was a youth leader and volunteered tons with our youth pastor and youth ministry. So, um, I recall that book. I recall teaching that book. I wish I could go back and undo all that.
Mm,
And just even in my own life, purity culture's role has been one of the key things that really stole um, parts of me from me. It's been hugely toxic in many ways. It um, robbed from our marriage for years and years and years because we weren't believers when we were first together and then
right.
even got married. We weren't Christians,
Yeah.
and for like I think I shared this before, but for the first 10 years of our marriage, I felt like we really screwed it up because we
Mm,
had sex before we got married.
right.
And so I carried a ton of shame in that. And um, when it came to sex in general, I was super shut down, like
Right.
super shut down. And so at that time, also, I'm a youth leader. I'm teaching youth this bullshit
Yeah.
that this is what God wants. Like
Mm,
talk about like can I just spend 5 years banging my head on a wall in repentance? Because like that is just awful.
Well, I think the problem, like I said, I don't think covenant's a bad thing. Um, but if it trumps consent, that's slavery.
Right.
And I think like there's just been so much shame put into this. And then
Yeah.
making promises and saying, well, like it's gonna be amazing, right? And it's like it didn't really
Right.
live up to the hype
No.
because like
Yep.
I don't think that Christian couples were having better sex than non-Christian couples.
No.
I don't know how you measure that, but like and so it's the whole thing is pretty silly. Like it's just like okay, like
Yeah.
I understand the merits in covenant culture, you know, building a family and
Yep.
having parents there for the children. Like all of that
Right.
is good stuff. And I think you can
Yep.
sell that without using shame.
For sure.
I think like the ultimate is that, you know, sex can be this thing that you share with someone that's very dear to you and a
Yep.
lifelong partnership. Like that's amazing and raise a
Yep.
family together. Like those are the ideals. But to say it's shame if you do it any other way, it's like, well, that's problematic. And we've
It's
got
hugely problematic.
a lot
Yeah.
of people hurt by this and a lot of people losing their faith over it.
Tons. I mean, this is going to take generations to work out.
Yeah.
It's not just like in 10 years it's going to be okay. This is going to take generations.
And I understand why. Like I understand why people wanted it that way. Like I said, I can see the merits of covenant, but the fact that they used shame and like empty promises is like
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
evil.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the story. Like that's the story of Jesus and John Wayne is that people have these ideals of what they want to do and they don't
Yeah.
care how they get it.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so 9/11, that was a crazy time. I remember understanding that these Islamic extremists were not playing by the same rules of engagement. And at some level, I was okay with the US government bending some rules to deal with those
Mhm.
individuals who were playing by different
Yeah.
rules. What was your experience with 9/11?
Yeah, I would say similar. Like our kids, yeah, our kids were babies. Um my husband has family in New York, so that morning I turned on the news and watched the second plane go in live. Um and his uncle actually is a firefighter, so we didn't like that day, like we didn't know what was happening with his
Yeah,
family. And I did feel that visceral, like just bomb them all. Like I had that, like
yeah,
this is terrible. Like
yeah,
um, go get them kind of
yeah,
thing. And that years later, it took years to unpack that to start to see like, well, hey, wait a minute, why would they do that? To
yeah,
even ask that question, why would they do that? What what's happening in our country that they're hating us so badly? Like,
yeah. That they're
you
willing to
know,
give their lives to kill like a
yeah,
bunch of people. It
yeah,
it still blows my mind. Like I'm like that's so incredibly sad. You know, like it's not that I'm angry at the person that was in that plane so
right,
much as like I'm like why the hate? And it's like was there hate thrown their way? And
for
there
sure,
was. And
yep,
after
for sure,
this there was and there still is.
yep, and there still is, and there like that's a fundamentalist sect of whatever they were, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a very fundamentalist way of seeing the world, what they did,
Yeah.
and like that exists in the Christian perspective too, like
Mhm.
to the extreme where people are shooting abortion doctors.
Yeah.
Um, it yeah, it's just like you just look at it and say that's where fundamentalism leads you. That's where wanting ultimate control leads you, is to destroying people's lives.
Yeah, and it's all based on fear.
Yep.
And
And
it's like,
shame.
yeah, and the antidote is love.
Yeah.
Love is the algorithm. I, you know,
Always.
I saw this preacher at a church I was leading worship at, and
Hmm.
he was a guy who basically said, "There's a price on my head," and it's
Hmm.
like, okay, tell me your story, right? So he tells this story about how he was in an Islamic country, and he wrote a whole book about like what he learned about Christianity from Islam, which is
Hmm.
such a dangerous book to write. He said that like there are fundamentalist Christians that hate that he wrote this book, and fundamentalist Muslims that hate that he wrote this book. And he's like, it's funny, it's like
Well,
the same thing, same hate coming from both of them. But
right.
he was in this country working as like, I guess it's like tent maker ministry. He worked with like businesses, and he tells this story about how he was like, he said the people in that country are super hospitable. Like it's like an Islamic um cultural
Hmm.
thing, that they're super hospitable people. And
Oh.
like they'd have him over at his house, and at their house, and he's sitting down with them, and he's like, well, what do you want to talk about, brothers? And they're like, oh, let's talk religion. He's like, ooh, I'm at an advantage over you guys. And they're like, what? He's like, well, what are the holy scriptures? And they're like, well, there's the Torah and there's the Quran. And he's like, oh, you're missing one. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, well, what are we missing? And he's like, you're missing the Gospels. And they're
Hmm.
like, oh. And they're like, well, how would we get the Gospels smuggled into our country? Like we could print them off, or we could bring them in a crate. And they're trying to figure
Right.
out how to do this illegal thing with this guy who's this business
Ah.
person from like Canada, right? And the missionary kind of looks at him and he's like, brothers, here's what I'll do. I'll finance the first crate of gospels, brought
Oh.
into your country. And they looked at him and they're like, oh, no, 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 that's a bad idea. Like a white guy,
Oh.
bringing in a crate of Bibles, like they're gonna think you're a missionary. And he's like, but it was just this incredible story. And eventually what had happened is like he actually had, I think, a dear friend of him that worked with him, who was also, I think,
Hmm.
from Canada, who got killed
Oh.
by Muslim extremists.
Oh.
And this guy, this missionary, went to the bank the next day, and there were all these people at the bank that are just like, oh, we're so sorry this happened to your friend. Like, this doesn't represent us. Just so you know, this doesn't represent us. Like, those guys were extremists and all
Yeah.
this stuff. And so it was just really interesting hearing his story, because it's just like,
Wow.
well, and kind of the in that he found to kind of share his faith was that it's like, no, we're all trying to understand the God of Abraham. And it was that
Hmm.
easy for him to bring up the gospels and bring Jesus into it.
Wow.
um I think it's like Islam isn't as foreign as we think it is, and I think like
No. Yeah.
as Christians tend to think it is. um and I don't know a whole lot about Allah.
Mhm.
I love that they're very strict with their prayer and everything. I think that's really cool
Yep.
that they're. I don't know if like they feel like they have to do that though, and I'm just like I still think God's more chill than that. But I'm sure I could have a great conversation with them, with someone over that. Okay,
Uh-huh.
final topic. Mark Driscoll. We'll wrap it up with Mark
Okay.
Driscoll.
Oh
Um,
boy.
So Mark Driscoll was a speaker I paid a bit of attention to. I actually liked some of his preaching. He was a big purveyor of manly Christianity, and he
Mhm.
said some really awful things about women and sex, like awful,
Mhm.
awful things, like women are penis garages. That's
Yep. Yep.
very messed up. Um,
Yep.
I never really followed him closely enough to catch that kind of stuff. His downfall was really something that captured my attention, though.
Mm,
There were a whole lot of accusations of spiritual abuse,
yes.
and when that went down, I think that really shaped the way I look at these kinds of things. I'm
Mm,
not sure if it was like the Bad Christian podcast. It might have been where they were
okay.
talking about how like Christians have this tendency to look at events that happen and be
Mm,
like, "Oh well, Mark Driscoll really screwed up, but I think we should forgive him." And it's like
mm,
he didn't do anything to you.
right.
And
Right.
so that really shifted for me because I was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, no, that's right. He didn't do anything to me. It's not my
Right.
job to forgive him. I don't think it's my job to condemn him either, but like
Mm,
I want to hear out the people that were hurt
yep.
and I don't want to tell them what to do with this."
Right.
So
Yep.
did you follow the Mark Driscoll situation at all?
Yes. Yeah. We
Yeah.
we used to love Driscoll.
Hmm.
We bought his books, and we listened to his sermons every week. Um, and I mean, then we started to move away from that into more progressive leaning
Hmm.
faith. And um, yeah, when it all started to fall apart for him, it was just like, wow, like when you try to hold something together so tightly through manipulation and control, you can only do that for so long. And
Yeah.
eventually it's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't really surprising to hear the behind the scenes stories of how he treated people,
Hmm.
um, because I mean that's the attitude that he gave.
It was his brand.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's a really bad brand. Like I still don't understand why John Wayne is winning out over Jesus in that kind of branch of Christianity. Like it blows
yeah,
my mind because it's like those are the type of people that wouldn't give the time of day to Mr. Rogers. And I'm like,
right,
oh, that's such a better form of
yeah,
masculinity, like
totally, totally, yep,
gentleness
yeah,
and being more hung up on Jesus with the whip. But
yep,
Jesus with the whip was like, you guys are taking advantage of people and this needs to stop, right? Like it's
right,
like you
right,
are swindling people. And that's
yeah,
love. That's
yeah,
love again because he was looking at the people that were being mistreated and he was
yep,
calling these guys out on their thing, right?
yep,
And there's no
and
doubt in my mind that, like, oh, what was it? If you're going to be Jesus with the whip, you better be prepared to be crucified for the same people the next day. And I'm like,
yeah, there, that's good, yeah,
whoa.
yep, yep. And he was only ever like hot spoken to religious people,
Yeah.
like never to anybody else.
Those people that God had put into authority.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Dang. All right. Well, I enjoyed going through this book with you.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Is there anything else you want to talk about on that?
I think we did really good today.
Yeah, I kind of wish we could have gone more in depth on the evangelists, but like I don't know a whole lot about them. So
I didn't really either. Yeah,
maybe that'll be what I need to talk to the author about
yeah, yeah. That's a good
if
idea.
I have her on.
I hope you do. I'm sure she will.
Yeah, I think she will too. Um,
Yeah.
all right. So Marie, people can follow you. It's Kootenaygirl.
Yep. Love Pirate Kootenaygirl. My name is gonna stay like that for a while.
Awesome. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
And I'm sure I'll have you on again soon about something we just have to talk about because we got into something on
Anytime.
Twitter.
I love talking to you.
I
Anytime.
love talking to you too.
Hey, take care.
You too.
Air Smudge.